Hello and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Morgana here today, and in this video I'll be sharing with you how to paint this stormy sea and sky. This is the inspiration behind today's painting. I took this photo a little while ago on my phone just before I ran for cover from the oncoming storm. So this is the reference photo that you're all free to use as well. If you pause the video at this point and take a screenshot, you're very welcome to use this for your own paintings too. But let's begin. I'll be painting today on some Arches brand rough watercolour paper, size 9 inches by 12 inches or 23 by 31 centimetres. This is 300 GSM or weight 140 pound paper. Really lovely paper, and I've just used a bit of masking tape here to just tape off the horizon line and keep it nice and straight. And I'm beginning this painting by putting a wash of clean water over the top 2/3 of the paper so that I can paint my stormy sky wet and wet. My board is set at an angle today. I usually paint flat, but I wanted some drift of rain today coming down from the storm clouds, so my board is at an angle of roughly 45 degrees. And I'm beginning with the brighter areas of the sky. So we're going to paint in a little bit of pale blue to start with, and I'm using some cobalt blue and my large mop brush just to dab in a little bit of slightly textured blue sky. And for a slightly pale yellow glow, I'm also just adding in a touch of raw sienna as well. You can see I'm spreading the paint about quite a lot across this sort of bottom part of the sky. I know that I'm going to be bringing my storm clouds down quite far, but I'm also going to be using some quite dark colours, so I don't mind about having some paint already here to bring the clouds down over. So it really looks like my clouds are overlapping. That faint hint of blue just should just peek through at either side. So now I'm going to begin my heavy clouds, and you can see I've gone for quite a dark paint mixture. This is a blend of Payne's Grey, Ultramarine Blue and Van Dyke Brown. Makes this lovely neutral grey colour, which I'm putting on using plenty of water, and you can see that the paint is already running. This is due to the water that I'm using and the slope of my board, which is why it's really handy to have these little boards that can prop up at various angles. And I think about 45 degrees is a really nice angle. It's not too steep, but as you can see, we're getting this lovely downward flow of the paint, which is granulating really nicely on this rough textured paper as well, which is giving us a little bit of help with that rain cloud. And it means that I'm leaving the bottom of the cloud well alone to just do its beautiful thing whilst I work a bit of texture into those upper sections. You can see we've got some water running down as well across that masking tape. It's easy to just mop that up with a little bit of tissue very carefully, trying to make sure it doesn't run down too far and spill onto the white paper below that taped line. So that's just one thing to keep an eye on if you're using this sort of technique, or if you're using plenty of water and an angled board, you will get some runoff of water and paint. And now you can see that I'm using a richer mix of paint to start building up a bit of texture and a bit of shape within this sort of dark blot of cloud. So we've got those clouds mostly along the central section there. We've got this wonderful sort of haze of rain coming down from them. And one of the reasons I like using this combination of colours for my storm clouds is particularly the ultramarine blue and the Van Dyke brown are wonderful granulating colours. I use the Winsor & Newton Cotman version of these colours, and I find that they granulate very readily with enough water, which is almost feels like cheating in a way, because it's very easy to get this lovely drift of rain with enough practice. So while that darker paint is settling in nicely, wet and wet, into that cloud bank and creating these lovely shapes, you can see I'm just dabbing out a little bit of paint in this top section and softening it down just using my mop brush and a little bit of clean water, before then going back in and building up another shape inside this little section of cloud. And again, just keep an eye on any water or paint that might trickle down and spill over the protective masking tape. Now here's an extra little trick you can use. I'm adding in some white gouache into the mix here. You can see it's an opaque colour and it's going on over the darker colours that I've already got here in this cloud formation. This is just to help add an extra little bit of shape and sort of almost three-dimensionality, that sort of rounded shadow, and build up even more shape within these sort of towering clouds and get almost like a foreground cloud and a background cloud. And you can see I am putting it on relatively palely, but it actually does dry a little bit darker than you'd think, because with the gouache you can add a little bit of water to it to get it to sort of move around, and of course that does mean that it doesn't dry quite as white as it otherwise would. Also mixing it into my palette of dark colours as well, and getting these sort of soft minty grey tones, which is going to really help build up some extra little bits of shape in this cloud. You can see I'm just doing a few little drifts of paler colour across the top there. And the reason for adding the white gouache at this stage is again to keep working wet and wet, and to have it nicely blended with those dark colours. So whilst I'm trying to keep the gouache relatively separate in order to create these sort of larger, rounder cloud shapes, you can see where I've added it in and it's already sort of blooming out in a way, and it's the edges of the pale patches are really softening down thanks to the water that's already on there, and the watercolour paint as well, sort of getting a happy little mixture of the two, which is going to create some really interesting shapes hopefully. And of course watercolour does rather have a mind of its own sometimes, so really all we can do with this sort of loose landscape painting is put the paint down and hope that it behaves itself some days. But this is a neat little trick, I think, for getting some three-dimensionality and some real sort of oomph into these big sort of towering storm clouds. Now on top of these paler shapes as well, you can also use the white gouache to add a little edge to some of the clouds, a little glint of white, as though the sun is just sort of peeking from behind this big towering pile of cloud and just sort of glittering slightly off the edge of these clouds. And I'm doing this by just using a small brush, just a small round brush, and just tracing over some of the edges of these cloud shapes, just sort of emphasizing the shape a little bit with my white gouache, which I've added a little bit more water to get it to move a bit more freely. You can see that it is softening and giving us a nice sort of soft edge, which you can then go in and blend even further if you like. Now this is such a lovely little effect, and again it does help if you do it wet in wet, because you get the soft edge as well. And of course, do be aware of overusing it. For me personally, I really like just adding in these little details like this, just with a small brush, just enhancing what's already there. But the temptation, of course, is to overwork it, to go a little bit overboard and add too much. So I think this technique works best when used a little sparingly. And you can see now that I'm just coming in again with my small brush and the dark neutral grey colour, and I'm just softening the underside of that white line and almost sort of thinning it down to really fine, and just so it's just that glint of light coming across the clouds. You don't want too thick of an obviously painted on white line. You just want it to be just this little hint of brightness somewhere amongst all that cloudy darkness. Another thing to bear in mind, of course, when adding this sort of last little light effect, is to make sure you do it all the lines at the same angle, because of course the sun is coming from one side. For me, I imagined it coming over the top of the cloud, sort of from somewhere on the right hand side, and just catching the tops of these clouds and just some of the right hand side of them. So now I'm happy with how the clouds look. I'm going to carefully lift the tape up and away just to make sure that I've got that nice clean line there, and make sure that you wipe up any excess paint really carefully. Sometimes you get a little bit of paint running down underneath the masking tape just on either side. I just do need to be aware of always needing to mop that up. So this is how it looks like now that it's dry. You can see I've just popped another little bit of tape on just across that horizon line, but on the other side. This is just to protect that line of cloud there, because I'm going to do some dry brushing now to begin to build up our lovely stormy sea. And my dry brushing is sometimes a little bit haphazard, and this tape is just to protect the sky from if I make any mistakes with the brush. I find sometimes that I struggle to do just very straight horizontal lines. My arm always seems to want to sweep up into a curve, I don't know if anybody else has that problem as well, but it's the bane of my dry brushing. However, this tape helps to prevent any unwanted smears going up into the sty, so I can concentrate on just really lightly just brushing just the tip of my large mop brush over the paper here. You can see I've put on some raw sienna again to start, just that little glow of yellow light peeping through where I'm going to overlay it with some darker paint. And as I'm sure you have noticed, this dark colour that I'm using is basically the same mix that I used to paint in my clouds to begin with. So it's a nice mix of Van Dyke Brown, ultramarine blue and some Payne's Grey. With plenty of water, of course, to just make it nice and loose. You want nice sort of loose paint for dry brushing. You want your brush to be able to soak up just enough so that it doesn't sort of drip or become sort of all clogged up, and you're able to brush it really lightly over the paper, just enough for it to be picked up by the lovely textured surface. And if, like me, you find dry brushing is not the easiest thing in the universe, one thing I can heartily recommend is you do get some rough textured or rough grained paper. It really, really helps. I think it's something that can make all the difference actually when you're dry brushing. The texture of paper is actually such a lovely, lovely thing here. And there we go, just taking off that masking tape now. So I'm happy with my dry brushing along the top. I did get a slight hint of paint coming up on this right hand side here. You can see it's only a tiny little smudge, just a couple of millimeters, so it's easy to just very carefully just dab that out with a tissue, and we still got a lovely clean horizon line. Now I'm just adding in here a little bit of cobalt blue into the sort of darker parts of the sea, just to give a little more basically more of a sea colour. We've got cobalt blue in the sky after all, those little glints of blue on the top, so I thought it would be quite fun to have a bit more cobalt reflected here down below. And this is something else you can do as well. If your paint gets too dark in a particular area, you can pull some of it out with a piece of tissue and then just continue to brush over it. You can see I'm just introducing a little bit of extra shadow here. This is some Payne's Grey that I'm just putting in to add a little bit of a dark reflection of those clouds into our sea. Now at this point I'm just adding in some simple rocky headland. Just at the side here on the right, I'm using the side of my mop brush, so I'm holding it horizontally, filled it with plenty of paint, and I'm just dabbing it in quite loosely and quite lightly. This colour is Van Dyke Brown mixed with a touch more raw sienna to lighten and brighten it up. And now I'm just going over it with a little bit of Payne's Grey, not washing over it completely, just dabbing it in and letting the paint sort of move around of its own accord. Just to get some interesting texture. Do remember that the board is currently sitting still at 45-degree angle, so when you put on thick paint it does tend to sort of move around and start sloping downwards. And now again I couldn't resist adding a little bit more white gouache just for some texture. This is such a fun little thing because the thicker gouache paint actually moves quite beautifully with the looser watercolour, especially when you've got quite thick paint as I have here, thick paint with plenty of water, you can see that as soon as I put this gouache on, it's sort of running downwards and moving of its own accord, and it's giving this lovely feathery soft effect that just helps to build a little bit of texture in these rocks and make them look a little bit realer. And you can also use the white to add some highlights to the sea, like I'm doing in this darker part here. Apologies for my arm going over the painting, but this is just if your dry brushing gets a little heavy and you lose some of that white sparkle of the paper peeking through, you can always go ahead and just add a little bit back in. And now on top of that, I decided that I needed a few extra darks as well, so I've just got a very small amount of paint spray on my brush, and again I'm just using these quick sideways sort of sweeping movements to just stuff a little bit of extra shadow in, and that's just the reflection of that big old storm cloud up there. The rocky foreground that I just put in as well is now dry, and you can see that the white gouache that I put in for texture has softened right down and darkened like it usually does, but it's not quite such a bright white sort of texture. It's now just giving us the soft little grey runs and feathery little bits of detail, which I really, really love. And now just for the finishing touch to this foreground, a little bit of sea spray. So we're imagining the waves coming crashing up, breaking up over these rocks and throwing up clouds of white spray into the air and over this little patch of foreground rocks here. So I'm using my mop brush and the white gouache quite thickly this time, and I'm just sort of dabbing it on, holding my brush fairly straight and using the tips to just get this interesting little sort of bits of texture, these tiny little sort of sprayy bits of white. This would be done as well, could be done with a stippling brush or a texture brush as well, just something that you want a brush that's nice and soft and feathery, and you can just dab on and get those little patches of texture. And now for the finishing touch, a pair of beautiful white birds flying in the face of the storm. Perhaps they're racing the storm back home to get some shelter before the rain pours down over them. And to put these birds in, I'm just using some more white gouache and my fine detail brush. This is a brush that is size 4/0, so it's really nice and fine. But really you can use any brush that you've got that comes to a nice fine point, and just go slowly and carefully, and you just get these lovely simple bird shapes. And here we are, this is the finished painting. Thank you very much everybody for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed painting this one. I mean, I always enjoy painting, but this particularly was really nice and dramatic and came to a very satisfying result. If you're interested in seeing any more videos like this from me, you can check out the Morgana Mondays playlist on Lois and Morgana Davison Art channel, or hop over to my Patreon page by following the link below the video and sign up there. Thank you again everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and whatever you're up to, wherever you are today, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon in the next video.